At the end of the night, I broke down with my wife and I said, I was crying and I said, what's going on? It's my 40th birthday. I said, why did I get all these beers? And she said, Simon, that's because that's what people know you for. This is part of your identity.
Mm.
And I'm like, bugger that. Like, I do not want it to be part of my identity. And it made me reflect on all these other conversations with my kids. Like if we go to a pub or a restaurant and I would usually drive to the place, but my wife would drive home because I've been drinking. And the kids would always say, Mummy, why is Daddy not driving? And we'd have to have a conversation about alcohol in the car. And I'm just like, no, 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 this is not cool. And so mindfulness also helped me tune into that and recognize that I'd been on autopilot. I've been using alcohol to feel safe. I'd been almost using OCD as a way to keep myself safe as well.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Soul Inspired. Today, I'm really happy to have Simon Rinne on with me today. He is somebody I haven't had someone like yourself on yet, Simon, that is someone who's worked in social work for a while. So first of all, thanks for coming on the podcast tonight.
Yeah, Joe, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have a chat about all things men's mental health. That's my jam. But we'll go wherever you want the conversation to go.
No, that is perfect. So that's what I was going to say. I noticed not only are you a social worker, but your focus is in men's mental health, right? So I've had quite a few women on who are in the female aspect of things, and we get talking through the podcast, and then I find a lot of the things that we talk about with females, I'm sitting there relating to everything too, but it's really you've niched down and worked directly with men, it sounds like. So I'm really excited to talk to you and kind of break down a little bit of what you do. The direction that I normally start my podcast with is asking if you could first talk a little bit about yourself and what your life was like before you made the changes you did in your life to get to the point where you are now.
Yeah, well, have you got 3 decades? Because that's essentially how long it took to get to the point where I turned my life around, essentially. So, to give you the short version, not the 3 decade long version. So I'm Australian. I grew up in a place called Adelaide, South Australia. And that's important because when we think about mental health and where we're at today in our mental health journey, context is really important. It's really important to understand where we're from, our lives growing up, the different relationships that we had growing up as well. And so I grew up in a place that was very working class. It was lower socioeconomic as well. So there's a lot of welfare, there's a lot of unemployment, drugs, alcohol, crime, bikies. It wouldn't be unusual to drive past a bikies clubhouse, for example, where I grew up. And so it was a tough environment. And I grew up in an age, so it's the 80s, 90s, and noughties. This is the decades that I was a kid. And I say that because it's a world before the internet, and it's a world where you didn't have Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever on the TV. And so who you were as a boy and then to become a man was really, I guess, defined by the people and the structures and the systems around you. So growing up in those northern suburbs, it was a tough environment. So you had to have an element of toughness to survive day to day. What we watched on TV, it was The Terminator, Die Hard, Rambo. These were the favorite movies in my household. I had, three brothers, and we all liked those alpha male movies where you've got that hero who would walk through fire or get shot or get stabbed and still save the day. And so even what I'm watching on TV, in my mind, I'm going, okay, this is what it means to be a boy and then ultimately a man as well. So you've got this element as well. And then in the schoolyard, it's the to be popular, to be tough, to be whatever is someone who's an alpha male. It's the jock. I was a bit of a jock. I was fast at school. I was great at sports, and that popularized me to some degree as well. I gained my popularity through my sport and my sporting achievements. But then also at home and the environment. I talked a little bit about having three brothers, but my dad as well. So very male-centric household. We all loved our sports, so well, that jockness comes in as well. And through all these different environments, and even on the sports field, all these different environments, essentially we were taught to be boys and men who sucked everything up, didn't share emotions, carried on because nobody wanted to be seen as weak. And if you were to shed a tear or show emotions, you might be labeled as a girl, as a wuss, as gay, all these types of labels as well. And so like most boys and men did, I did the same. I sucked up all those emotions. I didn't share them. I showed a bravado about myself in the home life, but also at school, on the sports field as well. So on the outside, it looked like I was a boy in control. But where this all turned for me was when I was about 8 years old, I developed obsessive compulsive disorder. But I didn't know it was obsessive compulsive disorder until I was 28 when I was diagnosed. So for 20 years, I suffered in silence. And so on the outside, I was this tough guy, this tough bravado alpha male guy, not a bully as such. I wouldn't go around picking fights, but I felt like I was strong. People saw me as a strong personality. On the inside, I was a broken child. I was absolutely a shell of a person. And that grew and grew from 8 years old into my teens, into my adult years, even into my mid 30s. I was a shell of a person. And to give some context as to what I'm talking about with OCD, because OCD is often a condition that is misunderstood. We see it in the media or in movies or whatever as people that just like things neat and tidy, or they like things in order. And it's often joked about. It's like, oh, I'm a little bit OCD, or my OCD is doing this. But it's quite a debilitating condition. In fact, it's a disorder, and it's for a very good reason. And so, to paint the picture, obsessive compulsive disorder starts with an obsessive thought, which is an intrusive thought and creates a lot of emotional or anxious, or anxiety distress. And then the only way to alleviate that thought is to perform a compulsive behavior. So that's the C in OCD. So it's to perform a compulsion, to perform a behavior. And then it becomes a disorder because you're doing this for over an hour a day. And it's quite a substantial impact on your day as well. So that's to define OCD. And it started for me as an 8-year-old. And I was in the schoolyard, and another student said to me, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever. Most people would laugh that off and let that just go in one ear and out the other, and that would be it. But for me, I thought that was, the truth. I thought that was the gospel. And so what I did to alleviate all the anxiety and distress about losing my voice was I started humming to myself. And so I'd go like this, hmm, every minute, just to check that my voice still existed. Because I really feared that losing my voice would lose my identity, would lose my ability to communicate with the world, my ability to laugh and tell jokes and be this larrikin jock kind of kid that I was growing up to be. And so I did that for about 2 years, and I didn't tell anybody. Nobody noticed I was doing it. So it was all internalized. Just me and my own thoughts were racing at a million miles an hour. And so fast forward to around 13 years old, and mum and dad separated. And so me and my little brother went with mum, and we moved out, and mum had to find secondhand furniture and clothes and deck out a whole house. She had to find a rental place to go live in these northern suburbs, which I was already feeling scared of because of the environment that it was. But that's where we could afford to live. And so I took it upon myself to be the man of the house. Back in the 80s, 90s, noughties, all my friends would say there's a man of the house. It's usually the dad or maybe an uncle or an older brother. That was me at 13. And this is where OCD just like went to the next level. It turned from just humming thing, which stopped finally, thank God. That was a really annoying thing to do every minute of every day, to the point where I was constantly checking that we were safe in the house. So I would go from window to door, checking all the doors were fully locked and you couldn't get inside from the outside. All the curtains were drawn so that you couldn't see in. And this is particularly at night time, not so much of an issue during the daytime, but at night time, yeah, so that there wasn't this mysterious boogeyman outside who could look into the house and see what's there. And the reason I did this because I had this overwhelming fear, or so this is the obsessive thought come through that if I didn't lock up the doors or the windows were slightly open and someone could break in, or the blinds were to a point where someone could peer in, they could see what's inside. That if I didn't do all those things and protect the household, so my mum and my brother, someone could break in, steal our stuff, kidnap us, kill us. These were the
Yeah.
three things going through my mind as a 13-year-old. And to add fuel to that fire is also thought we were going to burn down the house at nighttime if I hadn't checked that the stove was off properly, or the iron wasn't on, or
Wow.
the fridge was properly closed, because I felt like some magically these electrical appliances could catch the light and burn us down in our sleep, essentially. And so this checking behavior, which, for most people might be a quick lap around the house and then they go to bed and, they're all good. For me, the 13 was a 3, 4 hour ordeal some nights.
Wow.
And I would check, and then I'd go to bed. I would lay down, and my brain would say, Simon, did you really check that door, or did you check that window? And so up I get, off I go, because someone with OCD, they can't resist the urge to go and do the behavior because it alleviates the anxiety. So I did that. I checked and checked and checked. Go to bed, check. Go to bed, check. And often the brain would try to trick me and say, "No, you didn't check that." Or in the process of touching that door to check that it was locked, you magically unlocked it. Even though you didn't touch the handle, you didn't touch the lock. It just magically unlocked itself.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so this is my brain evolving as a 13-year-old. And then when I got my license as a 16-and-a-half-year-old, 17-year-old, it turned into my car as well. So is the handbrake on of my car because it would magically roll down and cause chaos. Could hit another car if it's on a bit of a hill, or it might hit someone walking across the road. And my brain would always go to the point where I'd always think of the worst possible scenario of that thing. So it could be that I kill a child because I didn't pull the handbrake on hard enough in my car to stop it from rolling down the hill. And so all these things would happen. There's a lot more different examples as well. But it's around, 14, 15 that I found alcohol. And alcohol was almost like a bit of a safety blanket for me. And so initially, like most teenagers, it was a bit of fun, getting drunk with your mates on the weekend and having a bit of fun partying. What I've come to discover as I reflect back on my life now as a 40-year-old is what I was actually doing is numbing the pain of this OCD. I was slowing the brain down because when I was drinking, I wasn't thinking about whether someone was going to walk into a party and stab me, or, locking up the house at home, because I was outside having fun. And so it enabled me to almost live a life, a teenage life, and forget all those worries, but the worries would still be there the next day. And so but they'd also be amplified. And so another aspect of the OCD is what we call pure O, or pure obsessions. And so for me, it was after drinking, a big night of drinking, it might be trying to remember the night and go, okay, did I have a fun night? Yep, tick that box off. Did I offend anybody, or do something that might offend somebody, or do something that might cause harm to them? And so this is the obsessive compulsive disorder trying now to start tricking me and going, Simon, you've got to really reflect back on that night, because maybe you said something that hurt someone's feelings, or maybe you did something that may have caused them, harm or pain. And so, in order to alleviate that anxiety, instead of performing an actual physical behavior, I would perform a mental behavior. So, this is the pure O, the pure obsession. And I would ruminate and ruminate and ruminate over the night before, trying to make sure or reassure myself that I didn't do the wrong thing at this party the night before.
Mm.
And I would ruminate so many times that I would actually lose track or lose memory of what actually happened on the night. So it would become like a weird movie where, part of it's true, but part of it's not true, but then they're blurred and nobody really knows what the true story is until right at the end. But I never found out what the true story was. And so I would do
Wow.
this for years, and I'd continue doing it because I guess I was looking forward to drinking because it was fun, but also at the same time, subconsciously, it was numbing everything. And so I'd do this cycle on repeat, on repeat, on repeat into my late 20s, when my now wife said, Simon, you're drinking way too much. And every time you go to these Friday night drinks after work, for example, you do this weird thing, this anxiety thinking thing. We didn't know it was anxiety. We didn't know it was OCD. She said, I think you need to get help. And for a couple of years, I refused to get help. I was being that bravado guy, like, I'm okay, nothing's wrong with me. I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to push on. But 2 years after, she planted that seed, and 2 years later, I said to myself, you know what? She's right. I've got to go do something because I can't keep living like this. And so, at 28, I buried that, I guess, that bitter pill that I was holding in my hand, that I didn't want to go help, or I shouldn't go and get help. And I went to a doctor's appointment, see my GP, had a doctor's appointment, and said, I think I'm struggling with mental health. And this was the first time I ever used the words mental health. I didn't know mental health existed.
Right.
And so they did a few assessments and referred me to a psychologist. And yeah, we did a few tests there. And she goes, Simon, you meet the classification for depression, you meet the classification for anxiety, and you also meet the classification for obsessive compulsive disorder. And this is the first time I heard any of these three things referenced, in at least to me as well. I'm like, okay, so I'm 28 years old now. I've got these three diagnoses. It felt kind of relieving, because all of a sudden I had a label or a name for the way that I'd been thinking and feeling and acting and behaving for 20 years prior to that. And so over the next couple of years, I would go on a bit of a journey of in and out of therapy, trialing different medications. I never gave up alcohol. I thought that, I'm good. I've got the meds. Or a therapist is going to magically heal me. But it wasn't until 2020 when I burnt out. So I experienced burnout I was in a high pressure work environment. I was studying a master's degree part time. We had two kids under three. We had this thing called COVID and COVID lockdowns, and plus my
Yeah.
mental health journey and alcohol, and I burnt out. So I hit an emotional, a physical, a spiritual, you name it, kind of brick wall, and I couldn't function. And it was here that I started to reflect and go, you know what? You've got to change your life because you're just running yourself into the ground. You're not dealing with your mental health. You're still drinking so much that, it's not good for you. And in fact, it's causing you harm, and it's causing you harm because you're also doing a social work degree, which is telling you that alcohol is not a great thing.
Wow.
And everyone's telling you that you slow down and take a look at what's going on. And so burnout forced me to do that. Burnout forced me to pause and reflect and find mindfulness. This is where I found mindfulness as a way of healing, and also a recognition that I've got to start doing more work on me and not expect other people to heal me like I would go into a therapist and get healed. So this is where Mindful
Wow.
Men was born, and this is what I do now as a men's therapist. I switched from that old career. I started a men's mental health therapy business with the idea of trying to be the guy that I never had from 8 to 28 to 38. I never had someone to talk to about this type of stuff. I didn't know how to talk about it. And I'm just trying to be that guy, not only for myself, but also for my kids. I've got a young son and a daughter, and also guys just around the country, particularly here in Australia, but also more broadly with what I do and with my podcast and my social media, just trying to encourage guys to go, we can talk about stuff. It's not that if you do talk about stuff, you're going to be a girl or wussy or gay or anything like that. It's just going to be human. And, we're going to bring out that vulnerability, bring out the authenticity in guys and help them reflect and go, it's okay to talk. It's a good thing. In fact, it's a great thing because if we don't talk, look at my story. There's so much years of bottling up, and I hear similar when the guys come into my therapy clinic. They're like, someone I've never talked about this stuff, and it's been 1, 2, 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And like, I'm so glad you walked in that door because I get it. And so, yeah, that's
Wow.
kind of the quick version of where
Hmm.
I am today as a social worker and men's therapist. So let's unpack that.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing all that. And I know you've shared it with your own platform and everything, but bringing it onto this platform and sharing it with everyone, it's something that is I'm trying to think where to start, because to show you probably why I had such interest as well in what you do and what's going on in your life is that one of the reasons why this podcast is so important to me in the spiritual sense of the things that I put on this podcast, which is the near death experiences and all these things. When I dig deep into these questions as to why, it's because I too had I had an anxiety disorder in my, I call it that. Again, the labels, you spoke about the label, how it helped you at a point, but I do sometimes, um, I worry about labels at times too, because we can get fixated on it and become the label. And I try to encourage people not to do that. But I know that it can bring relief if someone doesn't know what's going on. So I want to say it like that. But I know in my late teens, I was told I had I had generalized anxiety disorder, and it started, at one point where I just realized we die and we cease to exist, and it put me into this panic, and that was my fuel. That was what I used to to go into a complete chaotic mode between the ages of say 17 and 21, maybe even a bit younger than that, where I was constantly thinking I had something wrong with me. It was constant. And then I had to go down my own spiritual path and start researching about, and that's why I'm so interested in people that have passed away and come back and have these stories, and had to find my own faith and all these things. And that's everyone's personal journey. That was mine. That's what helped me. But it wasn't just that. That was just the beginning. And then I had to learn to heal. But I wanted to bring a couple things up. So I had mental health illness, mental health related issues with the anxiety. Um, my own, and this is the first time I won't probably talk about this very often on my podcast. Maybe I will at some point, but um, my father unfortunately passed away at the age of 57, quite young, from alcohol abuse. So I had an alcoholic father my whole life, and he wasn't in my life. He left when I was 4 or 5, and I saw him sometimes, but it was very rare. And I was raised by some awesome women who gave me some tools to at least survive in this world. But I didn't have a lot of really strong male energy in my life, and I had to take on that and become that. But again, something I didn't talk about. I just um, kind of just suffered in it quietly. And so I commend you for the things you do. I think it's amazing. As my life continued, I started to take social work. I was doing music since I was young. I was 11 years old doing music, but at one point I thought I want to work in social work, and I actually went and worked in it. Started taking some diplomas and things like that, and working in the field, working in actually a youth home for boys, and learned very quickly it's a lot. It's a certain kind of work, and I think I was doing my own healing through that, and I eventually realized that wasn't what I wanted to do entirely. Now I coach music and things like that. So, but found a way through it and learned a lot in that industry. So it's pretty amazing that we can at least talk about it now, because I think if we went back 50, 60 years from now, I mean, this was definitely not a thing. And you always hear that thing about men don't have as long of a lifespan as women, and especially in the past. And you think, how many of them were suffering in silence and turned to alcohol and terrible eating habits and smoking and who knows what else until they didn't live past 45 or 50, because they didn't take care of themselves. So um, just wanted to give you a little input on my life. Again, mental health related conditions, things with the anxiety, and and then the social work background and alcohol abuse on my father's side, which is again something that I don't talk much about, but I think in this kind of talk, I think it's necessary just to have some context behind everything. So, one of the things I was gonna say, this stuck out to me when I was listening to your story. I personally haven't dealt with OCD. I think I had a few moments in my life where I started to go down that road. I remember in my teenage years or late teenage years, I'd be in the shower and I'd think a negative thought. And I think, oh my God, I need to touch wood. Like I need to find wood to knock on. Like I need to knock on. And I got to a point where I remember one time I'm in the shower. I had to get it. I got to get out and knock on the door. And I did it. And I remember I got back in the shower. I thought, what did I just do? That
Hmm.
was, so I did show a sign of it, but somehow I had I don't know if it was from learning about things I was going through to say, okay, that was an odd behavior. Keep an eye on that, and everything's going to be fine. And I remember the next time that thought came into my mind and it said, knock on the wood, I thought, I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to see if it happens. And sure enough, nothing happened. The thought didn't create whatever it was I was thinking. And because I did that, I realized it was unnecessary and I somehow
Hmm.
let that go. But I think that is an OCD type behavior, is it not? So,
It is, yeah. And you said like it was an unusual thing, and a lot of people that have OCD, they don't actually believe the thoughts that come. So OCD can get very dark. Like I laugh at the humming thing now because humor for me is a part of the healing process. If I had known that there was people that took silent sabbaticals that would last years and still have their voice, maybe they'll be a singer or whatever. I wished I knew that as an 8-year old, but I just didn't. I literally my brain went to, yes, this is going to happen. I need to protect myself.
mm,
And a lot of the things that we think as an OCD are doesn't necessarily mean we believe them or want them in our lives. So, to give you some additional context, there's different themes of OCD. So mine are all around safety and security, and that falls under the umbrella of what's called harm OCD. So the absence of my behavior, so checking the doors, checking the windows, all that type of stuff, might cause somebody else harm. And that's what falls under this harm umbrella. Other people might get an intrusive thought when they pick up a knife, and the intrusive thought, what happens if I stab everyone in my house? They don't want to do that. It's this intrusive thought that tells them that they're the worst person in the world and they're going to do this if they continue to hold this knife. Now, imagine having that and being a parent and trying to cook dinner for your family,
Right.
cut up the vegetables, cut up the meat or whatever it is and get dinner prepped. We don't believe this stuff. And I don't have that particular OCD aspect. And we all have our different unique aspects of OCD. There's ones around pedophilia, and this one raises a lot of eyebrows. I didn't even know this one existed until I went into therapy for OCD. This concept around parents, for example, getting an intrusive thought that if they take their child to a public toilet, or maybe the toilet's at the shopping center or whatever, because they need to go to the bathroom, that they would be seen as a pedophile.
Oh,
So the behavior then becomes avoiding taking your children to the toilet, which is what you need to do as a parent to
right.
let them go to the bathroom. But
Right.
it's this overwhelming fear. And so that might be deflecting, having somebody else take them to the toilet, like that your partner or a friend, or maybe being really rigid with when you go to public places so that you can avoid having to take your children to the toilet. So there's all these really full-on things that we as a society go, oh, that's a bit weird, it's a bit unusual, let's stay away from me. But an OCD doesn't believe that stuff. That it's just the thought that they just can't get out without that behavior, without knocking on the wood or checking the door or whatever. But what you highlighted there is that you can control it. You can actually work through it. And there's this process that I've been through and a lot of other OCDs go through. It's called exposure response prevention. And the idea is that you want to prevent the response. So for you, it was you not knocking on the wood. That's you preventing the response because the response or the behavior reinforces the obsession or the
Hmm.
obsessive thought. And if you do that for long enough, this comes under that exposure therapy, I guess, aspect. If you do that for long enough, eventually the obsessive thought becomes quieter and quieter and quieter. And for some people, that goes away. And for other people, it just gets quieter to a point where you can manage without locking the house up for 4 hours. It might just take you half an hour or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So it is
Right.
it is manageable, but it's about how we critically reflect on that thought and go, you know what, is this real or is this my brain trying to trick me?
Hmm.
Do I want this in my life? Do I want to change as well? Wanting to change is a really big key component.
Hmm.
It can be exhausting, as any mental health condition is exhausting in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. But I guess the label here helps, and I acknowledge what you said about for some people labels help. Other people they live and embody the label. But once we know the label, we can then source the right treatment. And so
Right.
for me, having the label goes, okay, I know what's going on. It took a long time for me to find the treatment because even though I was diagnosed, the psychologist, the counselors, the psychiatrists would only ever focus on the depression, the anxiety, and the alcohol use. They never focused on the OCD. I had to burn out and then essentially come out with my story about men's mental health for me to discover other people with OCD in the world. I thought I was the only person, but it's actually quite a common condition.
Oh, yeah.
And then through those conversations, they're like, "Oh, have you heard of ERP, exposure response prevention?" I'm like, "No, I never heard of that." "Oh, it's the gold standard for OCD treatment." "Oh, okay, cool. I never heard of that either." And so even like about 10 years of still muddling around in the dark after being diagnosed to discover this through the beauty of social media, which is where I've discovered it, to then
Mm.
find a clinician who could treat it. And so from there, once we treat it and once we, I guess, come to that realization that we want to change, I guess it's then where we can go, I no longer want to associate my identity with this condition. And so that's, I guess, where I've been the last couple of years. And I guess that's where mindfulness is my spirituality. Mindfulness is
Mm.
me wanting to break free from this survivor victim mindset that I've had for so long. Like, what about is, oh, poor me, like all this type of stuff, to I'm going to thrive. I'm no longer going to let OCD, anxiety, depression, burnout when it happened, alcohol misuse define me. I'm going to actually break out of the shell and start living my true, authentic
Mm.
life as a middle-aged male who has a lot of privilege. I recognize I have a lot of privilege in the world, that we live in. But I'm sick of being this caricature of what society, has told me to be for so long. I want to be me and not be something else. And so taking off that mask and being my true authentic self through mindfulness has been something that I has really changed my life and actually enabled me to take more control back over my OCD, my depression and anxiety,
Mhm.
but also get sober. So last year I got sober because I got sick of drowning my sorrows. I actually want to start tackling this beast that's in my mind and get rid of it once and for all. And I can only do that with a clear state of mind as well.
I love that. It's interesting hearing you saying a lot of the things you're saying because they reflect a lot of what I went through myself. One of the questions I was going to ask you, but I'm going to talk about why I'm asking you this. Because when you were telling me about the things you were doing and you were mentioning all the things you did, locking the house up, going for hours and hours on end, I thought, wow, like that's, I mean, yeah, I knocked on a door, but I did it maybe twice and I kind of moved on. I didn't focus in on that. That was my moment of OCD. But the first thought that came to mind is how do you change who you are? Like, how do you change and become this other person? And immediately, and I'll let you answer that in a moment, but the answer that comes to me is if I'm reflecting on the fact that I was in this anxiety ridden um, person at one point in my life, and now I'm who I am now. Now, I'm still that person, and there's still going to be moments that come up in my life where I need to be careful because I know what anxiety feels like. I know what anxiety disorder feels like. I know the physical symptoms. I know the way my mind goes. Both OCD and anxiety disorder and other things almost feels like the same in the sense of the overly stimulated brain. Like there's like this constant like loop. And and that's why a lot of people have anxiety. They have to go on medication or whatnot, try to stop that loop and and things like that. I fortunately didn't have to go down that road. I was able to work through it, but it's a difficult process. And um the thing that came to me, you said mindfulness is your spiritual, mine was a spiritual journey, a faith-based type. What am I doing here? I had to really question that and figure it out. But see, that goes to purpose.
Hmm.
Purpose is like that big word that keeps popping up in my head as you're talking. Your mindfulness is your purpose. Your one of the questions I was going to ask before we even talked, before I even met you, I wrote down some questions. And one of them was, does having a purpose have a strong influence on alcohol misuse, mental health disorders? Do you believe that having a purpose can help with that? Because sometimes I do wonder if we are lacking purpose or lacking direction or lacking these things, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's spirituality, whatever we've decided as our person is going to go after. How much do you think that has to do with it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a great question. Absolutely everything to do with it. So often I say in the work that I do that mindfulness for me is more than meditation. It's more than being grateful for things. It's more than um, grounding yourself with some breath work. That's essentially when we think of mindfulness, that's what we think of. Mindfulness for me is switching off autopilot of life and switching on conscious living. And so with that, for a long time, I was on autopilot. I was on autopilot surviving day to day in those teenage years, in my early adult years, going through university. It was a miracle that I even went to university in the first place as a bachelor's degree because where I grew up, not many people went to university. They might be unemployed, they might be single moms, they might be working in manufacturing. So there was a big car plant, a car manufacturing plant near where I lived, which eventually closed down. So then they all had to find new work, trade work, a lot of services roles. Like my mum was a cleaner, my dad worked at the local council. And so these aren't big jobs that are going to make you loads of money. And so for a long time, I was like, okay, that was also my mindset, like surviving all that environment, going to university, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my life. I never really knew what I wanted to do. In my back of my head, I knew that I wanted to work with people like me, but I didn't know that meant psychologist or a counselor or a social worker or someone in the mental health field. This wasn't in part of my vocabulary. So after university, I was I just fell into a white collar job at a desk in the public service, had that for 15 years. But a lot of that was just living on autopilot. I would do the same thing day in, day out, kind of like Groundhog Day. It just felt monotonous. It felt like I wasn't living. So, in fact, I think halfway through that career, I said to my wife, I said, I need more. My brain feels like it's dead. It was overstimulated from the OCD and the anxiety and too much alcohol, but it also felt just numb. Like I felt like I needed to learn more. I kind of wanted to climb the corporate ladder, and that didn't happen. And so discovering social work actually helped a lot of this. So for social work, critical self-reflection is part of our practice. Understanding who we are in ourselves, but also who we are in our community, who we are on a global scale as well, and how all those different influences like culture, race, sexuality, consumerism, capitalism, feminism, all these big grand theories and concepts, how they interplay with us as individuals and people. And through that degree, I was able to start reflecting on my life and going, okay, this is where I've got to. This is where I kind of want to go. I had this idea of working in men's mental health, and because I wanted to help people just like me. And what amplified that notion of changing my life was my kids actually. And so my wife had been telling me for years I've got to cut back on the booze. And I would just disagree. I would say, no, it's not me, you're the problem. Like if you got a problem, you go sort it out with your psychologist or whatever. She never did because she's a very strong woman. She never went and saw somebody. Um, but my kids, my son just turned 7, my daughter's 4. And over the last couple of years, or last maybe 1 to 2 years, since my daughter's been able to talk, they might say, "Oh, Daddy, it's the weekend. Are you drinking a beer?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, yes, but I don't like you talking about that." I'm not sure why, because Australia has a huge drinking culture. It's part of our psyche. It's part of our genetic makeup is to drink and drink a lot. And you work out that a good night is how drunk you got,
Right.
essentially. So it's quite a normalized thing here.
Yeah.
And so, but when my daughter was starting to say that, and my son, and I'm like, okay, that's a bit weird. And then I noticed that I was drinking more frequently during the weeks, like weeknights instead of just weekends. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to notice in myself that this is not a good thing. My social work is telling me that this is not a good thing as well, but I'm still doing it. Now the TV is telling me these things because they're starting to get those adverts about, shortening your drinking or lowering your drinking. My wife had stopped drinking as much as she used to as well. Like she wouldn't drink a lot, but she would have a good time. But she was getting off of the grog, and I started having all these little tiny light bulb moments in my brain, going, okay, maybe I'm not really digging this, and I was starting to feel just really groggy. I mean, and alcohol is a grog, but I was feeling like really just lethargic all the time, and just I had these red rashes all over my body for years, and I never knew what they were. I thought they were heat rash, um, but it all came to a head on my 40th, which was last year. And I thought, okay, it's my 40th birthday. We're gonna have a bit of a barbecue, a bit of a party. I might get some nice gifts. Like 40 is a big thing, right? And so I got a few gifts and they were nice. And then I got the big gifts and they were all different versions of craft beer. And the old me would have been like, oh yes, this is amazing. Look at all this grog. We're not going to run out of grog tonight. We're going to have a good time. But the 40-year-old version of me, like I was taken aback. And then at the end of the night, I broke down with my wife and I was crying and I said, what's going on? It's my 40th birthday. She goes, Simon, I said, why did I get all these beers? And she said, Simon, that's because that's what people know you for. This is part of your identity.
Mm.
And I'm like, bugger that. Like I do not want it to be part of my identity. And it made me reflect on all these other conversations with my kids, like if we go to a pub or a restaurant and I would usually drive to the place, but my wife would drive home because I've been drinking because we don't drink and drive. And the kids would always say, Mummy, why is Daddy not driving? And we'd have to have a conversation about alcohol in the car. And I'm just like, no, 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 this is not cool. And so mindfulness also helped me tune into that and recognize that I'd been on autopilot. I'd been using alcohol to feel safe. I'd been almost using OCD as a way to keep myself safe as well. And
Hmm.
and the last year or so, I've actually told myself, and I heard this on another podcast, and it's been a fantastic quote that I've ever heard, is like when my OCD ramps up, I can say to myself, OCD, you can stop now. You've kept me safe for 3 decades. I'm
Hmm.
safe. I no longer need you anymore. I don't live in those northern suburbs. I'm not the same person. I live in a different state now. I'm safe. I'm okay. I don't need you anymore. And saying these things in a mindful way disempowers it. And
Right.
then Getting sober at 40 disempowers it because all of a sudden I'm taking back the control. I'm being mindful of my life. I'm consciously tuning in and not being on autopilot. And this is giving me the purpose stuff. So being able to critically reflect, um, having those internal influences, but also the external influences like my kids and my wife and my friends now, recognizing where I was growing up and what it meant to be a boy and a man then compared to what it is to be a boy and a man in 2024. And in particular, my son. So he turns 8 next year. 8 was when it all started for me. And
Mm,
I look at him every day and it's funny because my wife often says that we're a splitting image of each other. He's just like me. And internally, I say to myself, I don't want him to be anything like me because I don't want him to go through a life with mental health conditions.
right.
What I know now, though, through my purpose is me sharing my story is healing for me. It also brings up things. Every time I share a little bit more of my story, it brings up one more memory that I've lost or I've suppressed.
Right.
But it also shows him that he can talk about his mental health and because he can see his dad talking about his mental health. So he knows all about mindful men and he's got his own t-shirt and all that type of stuff. And he loves it. So I'm embracing that change for myself and the guys that I work with, but particularly my son. But I'm also not forgetting my daughter as well. Her knowing that men can talk about their feelings and emotions and be okay with that and not resort to the addictives. So the alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, porn, um, food, whatever it is to suppress it all, that they can actually be happy, healthy guys in the world, not feel like there's any shame about it and can get help. And so this is where my purpose comes from is breaking free from the shackles of the autopilot version of Simon to the consciously aware, in tune with himself, mindful Simon, which is it's just so liberating and freeing to be able to be in a position where I can just go bleh for an hour on a podcast or or in my therapy practice or with my own therapist
Yeah.
and feel good about it as well.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's beautiful when you can take control.
Mm,
I think what happens, I like how you use the word autopilot a lot. I was gonna say, I think a lot of what happens is we do go into autopilot and we're not in control. We're not in control at all. There's a lot of things in life we're not in control of. So the best thing I think we can do is try to be in control of the things we can be in control of. And you don't have to just lay down and let everything happen to you. And that's what happens when you're an autopilot. You're just kind of like, oh, well, this is what I've done before. I'm going to do it again. This is what I'm going to be able to, the strength that it takes to be able to say, no, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do it different. And then to get through that and go, wow, like,
mm,
and I think a lot of people, unfortunately, don't get to that point, and that's what needs to change. That's where the healing begins. When you start to say, oh, I have control. I can change this. So that was one thing. The other thing was the security blanket. I've been saying this for years. I mean, I talk to people all the time, whether it's in my coaching, whether it's podcasts, whether it's um, my girlfriend, whoever it is I'm talking to, right? And our not always. There are mental health illnesses that are a little bit more severe and need medical intervention, things like that. And I understand that, or something you're born with, things like that. But I do think there's a lot of things we're doing in life where the mental health condition we have is our security blanket. It's what we've been used to. It's what it's who we are. And change is really hard for a lot of people to make that change. But again, if you can really think to yourself, yeah, but I'm taking control and I can do something different. And then actually do it. Get rid of the security blanket, take control. It can be liberating, right?
mm,
So um that's and I've been really blessed in the fact that I have music in my life. Music has been the thing that always kind of brought me back if I got too far out there. I'd be able to grab my guitar and I'm gone for a few hours, and writing music and stuff. And not everybody has that outlet. They don't. And I've been really lucky I had that because I don't know how much worse it would have gotten for me over the time. You mentioned a few times that you work with men primarily. I too have a son. I have 3 kids in total, and I watch the way they are on. I have 2 older kids and one baby, pretty much. And the 2 older ones, I won't even I'm not going to bring them into this because if they find this out, they'll yell at me. But let's look at teenagers in general. The addiction to phones and the things that they see now. It's so impossible to get them away from it. And I think that I've said to a lot of people, if you want to get into a profession, you might want to get into social work. I think we're gonna have a lot of people who have strong addictions with their phones. I mean,
Hmm.
adults as well. I run a business, but it's mostly business. I'm on there, and I'll make the excuse, oh, I'm doing business stuff, and I am, but it doesn't mean that's good that I'm always on it, right? So that's also an addiction. I was going to bring that up, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because one of the questions I was going to ask you, if in today's society, in today's world, you work with men, do you see any common issues amongst men um, in today's society that tend to lead them down the path of alcohol and mental health, like alcohol abuse, mental health issues? Is there more commonalities here than there would have been even 20 years ago? Like something a little bit different now? I was curious
Yeah,
about
I
that.
think the commonalities are probably the same. It's just that we're more likely to talk about it these days. Historically, we wouldn't have talked about it. Guys would have gone to the grave with all these mental health issues that they've been
Right.
struggling with. The ones that, and I work with, guys from as young as 11 to 67 at the moment. That's my case range at the moment. So quite a broad range of generations. And and so what we're looking at is things around loneliness, guys feeling lonely, but not knowing how to connect with other people as well. A real big struggle of connecting in with um, either their existing friendship groups or maybe trying to how to make new friends. It's very hard as an adult. When we're kids, it's very easy to go, oh, you've got a soccer ball. I like soccer. Let's be friends. You know,
Right.
as an adult, it's very difficult to do that. And so there's also a bit of shame and stigma around that as adults. I mean, to give you an example, this recently happened with me with my drinking, and I met up with a guy who, we'd met through a podcast, and he was local to me, and I said, "Oh, let's catch up for some lunch one time and have a bit of a chat." And normally we would, drink alcohol, and that would be the security blanket to do that kind of thing to break through that social anxiety. Um, but we both put it off, and I think for the same reason is that we both also didn't want to drink, and so we put it off and put it off, made all these excuses. We eventually caught up for a coffee instead of a lunch, and as soon as we got there, I said to him, we didn't say it was for coffee. I said to him, mate, I know we said we'd catch up for a drink, but can we make that drink a coffee? He's like, oh, I'm so glad you said that. I said, why is that? He said, well, and we almost at the same time we both said we're off the alcohol, we're going sober,
Mm.
and and that broke a huge amount of ice. And then we had some coffees, had a great chat over an hour and a half, and then at the end of it, he said, Simon, this is going to be weird for me to say. I think I want to be your friend, and I'm like, I said exactly. That's that was my response. I laughed, and then like, you know what? I think I want to be your friend too. These are grown males sitting in the
Right.
cafe.
That's
Like
hilarious.
when would you ever say that? But and now we're really good mates, and so we'll talk to each other at least once a week. We catch up for a surf, during our week as well, and we've developed this friendship. But I think a lot of guys struggle with that. And I've struggled with loneliness for a long time. We think about the modern day as well. In Australia, we have a lot of guys that work what's called fly in, fly out of mines. So they might live, say, where I live on the Sunshine Coast, but have to travel to the opposite side of the country to work in a mine. And they might be away for a month at a time. Then they come home for a week and then they go back. And they're doing this fly in, fly out work all over Australia, if not all over the world. And so they're very disconnected from their local community. They don't have time to make friends or keep friends. Or maybe the friends that they've got are ones from high school that keep talking about the same rubbish all the time. They don't grow
Mhm.
from those same conversations, those old conversations. And so they feel a bit of disconnect. And maybe they're drinking too much or taking drugs or doing some other addictive things that is just reinforcing these negative cycles that they get stuck in. So loneliness is a big one, and trying to work out how to make friends in 2024 as an adult male is crucial.
Mm.
The other aspects are around the masculinity stuff. So we've talked a bit about social, we didn't name it, but I'm going to name it social constructs of masculinity. So I gave that story of where I grew up and when I grew up and how that all influenced me. That's essentially society telling us how to be a boy or a man. We come out the mum's womb and we get, if it were a boy, we get a blue t-shirt. If we're a girl, we get a pink t-shirt. And so from
Right.
day one, we're taught you're a boy, you're a girl. And so I think there's a bit of discourse at the moment with the different pronoun movement that's happening. It's like I don't want to be labeled as a boy or a girl. Like I want to have my own identity as well. So we're seeing a bit of backlash there. But a lot of guys come into therapy and they're like, I'm a guy, but like I have all these emotions that I've never expressed before. Does that make me less than a guy? I'm like, no, that makes you human. So we talk about the
Right.
human, we talk about humanity and what it means to be human and to switch off autopilot and go, you know what, you're recognizing the whole of you for the first time, maybe ever, compared to the parts of you that society has told you that you're allowed to express. So for men, it's aggression,
Mm.
it's bravado, it's alpha male stuff. This is all that toxic masculinity that's in the social media, in podcasts, in the news at the moment. It's that's acceptable, but to be an emotional, vulnerable, authentic guy is not so, you know,
Hmm. Right.
but then you got the snag, so the sensitive new age guy. I was telling my wife about the snag on the TV we were watching last night, and like I said, I said to my wife, "Do you think I'm a snag?" And she just looks at me and just laughs. So he goes, "You're emotionally charged snag," and I'm like, we've had these labels, and maybe I'm a snag. Maybe we need more snags. There's lots of snags out there in the world, but it's this concept of who we are as guys. Who are we allowed to be as guys? If we want to change, is that okay as well? Like, if I want to be the emotional guy, but I've been brought up as the tough guy, is that okay? So guys coming in and questioning all that stuff.
Right.
And then you get the addiction stuff. So yeah, the drugs, alcohol primarily, a bit of gambling stuff, getting lost in these worlds because they don't know how to express emotional dysregulation. And this is the only way that they know how. So if we look at alcohol use, it's a drug essentially. But in our culture, it is very much of an acceptable thing to go and do. In fact, it's all over our TV, all over the advertising. I said I love sports. It's all over our sports jerseys, the sponsors, and all this type of stuff in Australia. Um, it's everywhere. You can't get away from it. Gambling ads is everywhere. Like I love watching soccer and Australian rules footy with my son, but every time we watch it, we've got to watch, them highlighting what the bets are and what the odds are for the wins. And I'm just like,
Right. Right.
I don't want my 7-year-old to see that. I just want to get to the game. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care about
Yeah.
this washed up player from 30 years ago telling me about the odds of the game. Like,
Right.
and
Right.
so we can't get away from it, but it's so normalized for us that it becomes an
Hmm.
escape. We
Yeah.
escape through it. So these are the main issues, and then the sub issues are around relationships, whether that's with our kids or our partner. Aggression, how do we manage aggression? And I guess that leads into family and domestic violence, which is a huge issue as well. And then in between all that, all the other messiness of life, whether it's career transitions, retirement, seeing a lot of guys who have retired, or I also work with guys who have developed maybe a profound disability that stopped them from working,
Mm.
or and so adjusting to different life cycles and life stages is a big thing as well, because again, that comes into identity. I
Hmm.
work with guys that have had strokes and all of a sudden they can't work
Right.
or they can't
Yeah.
live on their own because it's too dangerous. So they have to live in a disability housing or something like that. They lose their identity. And so these are the things that we work on with guys day in, day out.
Mm.
But at the crux of it, at the very core of it, it's helping guys to be mindful, to switch off the autopilot, but also recognize that they can come in and share and it's okay. They're not going to be judged. It's free of discrimination. It's just tell me where you want to go and we'll just explore those feelings and thoughts, and here's maybe some strategies or tools that I know of that I've used in my own therapy because I'm a therapist in therapy, that I've found helpful for whatever condition, or situation you're going through, and maybe they might be of use to you. And if that doesn't work, maybe I can find another therapist who can really, work in your niche area, because, it's coming to therapy. Not every therapist can do everything. I'm great with OCD. I'm great with depression, anxiety, alcohol,
Right.
parenting. I'm not so great with, I don't know, finances and stuff like that. That triggers me. And so someone struggling with finances, I'm like, well, maybe you need to find someone who's got a specialty in that area. So, I mean, that was a pretty poor example, but
No,
finances
no.
get me every time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I can understand that. Again, if you related to something, that's why I remember when I took social work, as I was meeting people who were taking different courses, and a lot of us came from different things. Like we struggled with different things, whether it was depression, anxiety. There's so many different, and sometimes it's important because you got to have that life experience so that the person that's sitting with you, I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that can't help. Um, I just feel like the life experience does give that a little edge where, oh, I've been there, and
Yeah.
you can kind of be a little more understanding. Um, so thanks for breaking that down. I was really curious about that. Now, again, it's called Mindful Men. Where do people find you? Like, what do you just work primarily in person? Do you do online? Like, what is your practice like?
Yeah, so I work primarily in Australia because as a social worker, you have various, I guess, registration requirements. You can only work in certain parts. So for the US, for example, you can only be registered in the state that work in and that you're registered in. So in Australia, I'm a bit more fortunate. I can do Australia wide. This year, I'm looking at some coaching, so that will open up international markets. I can put a coaching hat on instead of my social work hat on. So that's coming down the track. But at the moment, it's my website's the easiest place to find me. So it's www.mindful-men.com.au. And that links also to the Mindful Men podcast, where we have conversations just like this every single week with people all over the world telling their unique stories about, hitting rock bottom and then, coming up through the ashes and triumphing through life. So that's the best place, the website. And then, yeah, check out the Mindful Men podcast if you can.
Mindful Men podcast. I'll be following it. That's awesome. Um, and that do you have that every week? Is there a particular time frame that it comes out, or do you just kind of
Yeah, every
whenever?
week, every Tuesday Australian time. So yeah, I think we're up to 118 episodes now.
Oh
So we've been
wow.
going for a little while, and
That's awesome.
I'm a bit of a podcast addict. Talking about addiction, I am addicted to
Yeah.
podcasting. So my wife just goes,
Hey,
"Another one? What's going on?"
it's kind of the same thing I talk about with my students when I'm coaching the music. And I'm saying, one thing I've learned in my life is there's unhealthy habits and healthy habits. If we can get the right addictions in place, then, if we have an addictive personality, play music or listen to podcasts or do things that are going to actually enhance your life because it is easy to find addictions. You don't want to get too addicted because people can become workaholics or they can become but it is healthier if you're doing something that's actually going to benefit you in your life. So
Absolutely.
so just like the people listening to this podcast, thank you for following and sharing and all these things because it's great to be able to bring these kind of stories like you're bringing to a new audience, right? So, um, before we end the podcast, I or the episode on the podcast, I always ask everybody this question, and I'm actually interested in what you're going to say because your storyline is really, I have a lot of guests that come on that have had these spiritual experiences or they have all these different things like this is real life stuff we're talking about here, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. If I were to just ask you this question, and you can take it for what you want and say what you want, but it's the question of why do you think if you look at the experience that you've gone through in your life up to the point you are now, and then, I'm probably going for a long time yet. Um, why do you think we're here? Why do you think we incarnate? Why are we here? What is what is the whole purpose of everything? What comes to
That
you?
is that's a big question.
I know.
Wow.
And I mean, you can
I,
look at it like if you look at the changes you've had in your life, right? Something's going to come to you.
mm, I think the reason we're here, well, the reason I'm here, I'll go internal. The reason I'm here is to support men to open up about their mental health. I think that is my purpose. It's something that has been so ingrained in my life and so unknown for so much of my life that it's the second half of my life, or I like to say it's not the second half of my life. I've got a lot longer than a half to go, is just driving this message that men can talk about mental health. And there's a little image of a little version of me, my son, Gus, who I think is driving that. I see his face all the time when I talk about mental health and men's mental health, and I'm doing it also for him and my daughter Pippa as well, and my wife Rach. So everyone's got to get a message in this episode. But I'm doing it for the guys and for them and for me. I do this because it's for healing, as I said before. So that's my purpose. I think our purpose as a society and or even we as a society is to I don't know, it's to harness these kind of conversations so that we can all grow in some sort of way mindfully together. We can all evolve our thinking as well. I think for a society of men, particularly, like these conversations or these concepts, these thought bubbles, the books that people write can all lead towards a new age of men coming through from previous generations who are in tune with their vulnerable selves, their authentic selves, that don't need to resort to addictive substances or conditions, that don't need to resort to violence, that they're just okay with talking about stuff. They've normalized it. So at the moment we say we talk about mental health because we want to normalize our mental health as much as our physical health. I think the future generations, it's just normalized. It's just part of what they do. They have a mental health condition, they go get support for it. And I think these conversations also evolve the way that therapy is defined in the mental health space as well. So we haven't touched on it today, and I won't go into too much detail, but I'm one of a few providers that I know where we take therapy out of a clinic. We get rid of the clinicalness of therapy and make it more human. So we do it in walk and talk therapy. We're on the beach, we're at a cafe, we're go for a drive. And I think the more we can normalize it and tailor it towards a new generation of men, or even the existing generations of men who struggle to talk about their stuff, um, it can just it can just make the world a better place by changing the way we're doing it, changing ourselves, changing the way we do it, and we can evolve together. So it's not a very good answer to this massive question that you've asked me, but these are the thoughts and this is the brain where it goes to all these little points of the world. And
Yeah.
it's a great question, and maybe we can do another episode when I've had a decent think about it and come back to you with
I knew
something a bit more profound.
that's why I thought, do I throw this question at him? Do I throw it? Do I throw it? And if I'm going to be honest with you, I actually loved your answer because, you know, it's like I say, quite a few people have said to love. Okay. Like it's as simple as that. Yours is that to open these conversations up to help change the lives of other people. Um, why can't that be our purpose? Like we're evolving, like we're evolving look how much, I'm probably close to your age, not too far off. But if you look at, like you said, when you were younger, you didn't have internet, you didn't have like, and now it's like everything is right there. It's right there. So we need to talk because it's just everything is faster and ramping up. And we need to come back to a place where we're actually having a conversation and keeping each other in check. And I think that what you're doing is great. So I think that I think your answer was perfect.
Awesome.
So and coming from what you do, that's exactly what I was kind of looking for, right? So, and it's really to help one another out. So I want to thank you again for being on here today. And hopefully maybe we will do this again. Maybe we'll chat, or I can see. I'm going to check out your the Mindful Men podcast, Tuesdays, Australian time. I'm over in Canada, so we have a different time zone. So you probably in the summer months now. We're just getting through the winter. So it's I have a little more pale skin than you. You look like you've seen the sun a little bit more.
I have seen the sun, yes.
Yeah. I want to say to everybody that listens to the podcast, please like, share, subscribe. We're trying to get our message out. And the more people that see these podcasts, the better the world can become. So thanks again for being on here, Simon. Appreciate the time you took today.
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate it.
So